getBy, queryBy, findBy. Why are there many query functions in Jest? That's what we are going to discuss in this video, so let's get started. When you want to do a unit testing and test your components in React or Next.js, first of all, you render the component, and after that, you select elements on the screen in order to test them. So in order to select these elements on the screen, there are multiple ways. You can use getBy, you can use queryBy, you can use findBy. But what are the differences between all of these functions or all of these query functions? So let's see, first of all, the getBy. I have this component called user form, and if you look at it, it's just a form component with labels and input fields. I have two labels and two input fields. One is name and one is email. So I want to select the email input by using the getBy role. getBy role text box. This is the area role for the text box or the input field. And then I call it, the name is email. The reason is because this input field is connected to this label via the HTML4 and the ID. So once they are connected, we can reference the input by its name, which is email, and the email is this one, okay? So anyway, I selected this, and after selecting that, I want to expect it to be on the screen. But there is something interesting about getBy role, which is, let's suppose that, okay, let's suppose that I comment this assertion, and if I comment the assertion, you can see the test already passes. So the assertion doesn't make any sense to write it in the first place, because if the getBy role function finds any element on the screen with the text box, it will just pass the test. And to prove my point, I can put something else like list item and save. You can see that the test fails. The test fails. I don't need to do any assertion to prove that the element does not exist on the screen, because the test already fails, because the reason is this function or this query function throws an error. Okay, it throws an error, and the error caused the test to fail entirely. So I don't need to write any assertions, but I want you to think about again about whether you write assertion or not, because when you work on a project in a team specifically, you're not the only engineer working on the project. So if you do any commenting on assertions and some other engineer comes and said, yeah, instead of getBy role, I prefer queryBy role, so write queryBy role, and even if it's list item, you see the test will pass, because queryBy role will not throw an error if it doesn't find some item on the screen. Okay, so in that case, I really recommend that you keep the assertion, even if you use the getBy role. Just keep the assertion just to make sure 100% that if the code changes by other engineer or by other developer, the test will work as expected, because not all developers, not all engineers know the difference between getBy role or queryBy role. But now that you know the difference, you can take the responsibility and keep your code scalable. So that's one thing. Another thing is getBy role should be used, as I said this in this title. getBy and getAllBy, whatever, any query function that starts with getBy or getAllBy should be used to prove that some element on the screen exists, and if that element does not exist, it will throw an error. So it's a perfect use to prove an element exists on the screen. Okay, let's move on to the next case, which is queryBy or queryAllBy. Okay, in this case, as I told you already, that if it doesn't find a list item on the screen, it will not throw an error. Okay, and like in this case, it will not throw an error, and it will return something. And this something that it returns, I need to do an assertion to see if it exists on the screen or not. And in this case, I expect name field, and I want to say that the name field to be in the document. So let's see. Yeah, it fails because there is no list item on the screen. There are only input fields. So I need to do here not to be in the document, and then the test will pass. So in this case, the best scenario to use queryBy or queryAllBy is to prove an element does not exist on the screen. Okay, and let's comment this and go to the last scenario, which is findBy or findAllBy. And these two functions, or these two prefixes of the query functions, should be used whenever you have data fetching from some API. Now, I didn't talk about how to test API or how to test data coming from an API yet, but we still can demonstrate a scenario where data is a promise. So I created this component, this Next.js component. By the way, it's a client rendered component. Let's see that together. And I have on top this directive which says that it's a client component. And the reason why it's client component is because I want to use the use effect and use state. Now you can say that I can fetch data from API using the async, because since we are using let's comment this. Since we are using Next.js, I can use server as a server component, and then here I can fetch data from the API, some API URL. Okay, some API URL. I can fetch the data and consume it. Data equals to await, and then call const users equals to await data.json. Okay, and I get array probably or something like that. I can do that, but the problem with this approach is that in server components, all the data will be rendered on the server. So whenever I request this component, the data will be first fetched from the server, and then it will be accessible to my application. So I don't need the findBy at all. I can query that using queryAll or getBy. So I don't need the to await any data coming, because the data will not be awaited for. Okay, because it will be already available to us because it's rendered on the server. So it doesn't make sense to use server components in this case. So I will go back to the original component, which is a client component, because in client component, when we have this client component, when I request this from the server, the server will render only the HTML and will send the HTML with the script. And this JavaScript will, as soon as the component will render on the screen with its HTML, the use effect, as soon as that renders, the use effect will run, and it will fire this function to get the users. Okay, this is the users. It's just a promise, and then it will set the users object, the users array as a state. But the first moment or the first millisecond that this component renders on the screen, the users array is an empty array. Okay, that's something important to understand. But as soon as it renders on the screen, the use effect will fire, and I will get the users from this promise and change the state of the application. So in my case, I expect that that whenever I render this component and whenever I render this component and get the users, okay, I want to get all the list items, because all the users will be in a list item. So this list item should be should be an array, and that array has a number of 2. But as soon as the component renders, first of all, it will have 0 elements. Okay, because why 0 elements? Because as I told you, we need to await for this use effect to fire in order to see the user's array to change from 0 elements to 2 elements. So let's see together why this fails. Okay, this fails for another reason. Now you can see that the test already passes because I am already awaiting for the find all by role to fetch the users and the items. But let's see this scenario where the names. Okay, I use query by all. Query all by role list item, and I expect the names that I get from this query function to have length of 2. But as soon as I run the test, you can see that the test fails, saying that the expected length is 2 because I expect 2, but in reality I receive 0. The reason I receive 0, as I told you already, because the query all by role does not wait for the use effect to fire to get the users from this promise and then set the user's state to this new array. So that's why it fails. And I can't await. I can't write await here because it doesn't return a promise. So the only solution is to use find all by role, like in this case. And here I want to comment this and write on the side that this does not wait for the promise to be resolved. Okay, and now I can write names here and still see my test. Yes, it passes successfully. And to prove my point, I can write 20. And now it fails, saying that it expects 20, but in reality it got 2. Okay, that's why it fails. So this is the difference between these query functions that we have available in the Jest documentation. And by the way, if you read the documentation, it's not clear to see the difference between getBy and queryBy and findBy unless you try to write test yourself and waste a lot of time. So I hope that I saved you some time to just give you an example, understand what is the difference between getBy and queryBy and findBy and when to use each one of these functions. I hope this video was helpful for you, and if it was, please consider subscribing to my channel to get more videos like this in the future, and also to support me and to support the YouTube algorithm. And also please consider checking the description box below to see the link to my GitHub repository that hosts all my code that I'm writing in this video, not just in this video but also in the videos in the previous ones in this testing series. And by the way, if you didn't watch the previous videos in this series, please check out the entire series here on the screen, and see you in the next video.